Hello. Today I would like to talk to you about my first impressions on Gruniger Games' new Ruthless mode. The reason I want to play Ruthless mode is because I've been playing the game for roughly 8 years now, and I've pretty much done everything the game has to offer. As in, I have killed all the endgame bosses as they have released throughout the leagues, and last league I even killed all the Uber bosses using one of the worst skills in the game, Void Sphere. Now, aside from killing bosses, I have more or less beat the game when it comes to farming strategies also, as I accumulate roughly 1 to 4 mirrors per league. Thus, I am looking for a new challenge. The reason I chose Softcore Ruthless is because I do not like the concept of hardcore, as you kind of have to play like a pussy and just run super easy content until you steamroll it. Whereas I would much rather push my character into hard content sooner and teeter on the edge of dying, rather than only doing some hard content 10% of the time. In addition to this, I don't like the concept of SSF because if I get a good item and I can't use it, I would like to trade it to someone else that can. Thus, I chose Softcore Ruthless. Now, after playing Ruthless for roughly 24 hours, I've come to the following summary of what Ruthless actually is, as I believe there are some misconceptions of what the game offers. Now, after playing Ruthless for roughly 24 hours, I can agree that progression is slower in this mode, but way less than what people think. So, since this is Softcore Ruthless instead of Hardcore SSF, progression is actually only roughly 2 times slower during the campaign and 4 to 16 times slower during mapping. The reason is only 2 times slower in the campaign is because I believe there are only 2 different factors that are limiting your progression during the campaign, and that is the nerf to movement speed and movement skills, in that it is harder to find boots with movement speed on them, and quicksilver flasks are nerfed, and with the removal of movement skills, you just in general move slower, thus you will take longer. And in addition to this, there obviously has been a massive reduction in the amount of loot mobs drop, especially in the campaign. So if you do not trade with anyone throughout the entire campaign, you will roughly find maybe 10 to 20 rares throughout the whole entire campaign, and you will most likely be killing everything on a 1 link. Due to these restrictions, I personally, on a league start, typically beat the campaign and Merciless Lab in roughly 8 to 10 hours, but in my Ruthless mode run, in which I was playing Bane and Essence Drain, I beat the campaign and Merciless Lab in 15 hours. Thus, it was roughly 2 times slower. Now, where things actually get slower is after the campaign, and this is because not only are the 2 factors of being slower and less loot slow your gear progression down, there are 2 additional massive nerfs to Ruthless mode, and that is maps will spawn less league mechanics, thus each map that you put in will have way less mobs in it, and thus way less loot will drop. And in addition to this lack of league mechanics can't really be fixed because where you would invest heavily in your Atlas tree to spawn these league mechanics, your Atlas tree is also nerfed. Thus, I would estimate that in white maps, you'll be progressing 4 times slower than in the normal game, and then when it comes to red maps, you will progress 16 times slower. And the reason for this is because in white maps, you do not need to invest very heavily to sustain your mapping. So to sustain white maps, you literally just have to transmute your maps, and you will be able to sustain up to tier 5 maps. But as you get into yellow and red maps, which I have barely gotten into yellow maps now after playing for 24 hours, but I can see where the game is heading, you will need to invest heavily into sustaining these. So, for example, since I beat the campaign in 15 hours and I've played 24 hours on my character, I have spent roughly 9 hours farming white maps. And in these 9 hours, I was able to acquire roughly 30 alchemy orbs worth of currency. And in Ruthless mode, alchemy orbs are kind of the main currency to use when trading and can be roughly equivalent to having 1 to 2 chaos in the normal game. So, in the 9 hours of white mapping, I was able to roughly generate 30 to 60 chaos orbs worth of currency. That being said, since I was running white maps, I did not have to invest basically anything into sustaining the white maps, so all this currency went into making my character stronger. So Currently, the value of all my gear, again, is 30 alchemy orbs, and on screen right now is what you can roughly determine this money will be able to buy you, at least in the first week of Ruthless. Now, as more and more people will get into higher tier maps, obviously gear will be more prevalent, and you will likely be able to purchase this gear at a third of the cost in a few weeks or a month, as long as people keep playing the game, as this is where point B comes in. And that is, if Ruthless had a larger community of people, the slower progression that the game is known for would actually be a lot faster, because there would be so many more items in circulation. So currently, there are roughly 1,800 players that have beaten the campaign and are level 70 or higher. There are 500 people, which includes me, that are level 80 or higher, and there are only 4 people that are level 90 or higher. If there was 10 times as many people playing the game, it would likely be way easier to get way better gear with the equivalent amount of currency that I spent, and thus my character would be way stronger if more people are playing. Alongside this, if you want to progress your mapping way faster, then you can join a group, as every single time a map drops, it will lead to all players getting the Atlas progression, which is very needed, as the more league mechanics that you can spawn in your maps, or the heavier your Atlas is filled out, the easier it will be to sustain yellow and red maps. But for me personally, since I basically didn't invest into mapping for white maps and put all my investments into my gear, my character is pretty strong comparatively, and I would estimate that the strength of my character would be able to do all the way up to red maps. So over the next 12 hours, I will likely not put pretty much any currency into improving my character, and any currency generation I will receive will be going straight into Atlas progression. Now, the last thing I will touch on is meta builds for Ruthless. So currently, right now, most people are playing casters. And since casters use blue sockets and caster related supports, there is lots of gear on the market for melee builds, as in pretty much any item that has armor on it with triple resist and life is substantially cheaper than an ES based item with a little bit less life and maybe 2 resists. So at least when it comes to a Ruthless setting, it is advantageous to play non-meta builds, because non-meta builds will be substantially cheaper. Thus, you should be able to fully gear out your character way quicker, and especially purchase your support gems significantly sooner than if people are playing meta builds like Cold Dot. This discrepancy in the economy in Softcore Ruthless should enable typically perceived weak builds like melee to actually be extremely strong, as currently melee builds would be way tankier than their equivalent caster builds. And since XP penalties are a lot worse in Ruthless, in the long run, these tankier, non-meta melee builds could potentially pull out ahead. In summary, yes, Ruthless mode has slower progression compared to the regular base game, but it is not uncommon to have many drops for every single map you do. As in, every map that you do, you'll get roughly 5 to 10 rare item drops, a few pieces of currency, and maybe 1 unique per 5 maps. I find the game mode to be fairly fun, as it is something new, and your choices really matter when it comes to choosing different pieces of gear, since there is very few options to go around. If you were previously on the fence about playing some kind of Ruthless mode, I would suggest you give it a try, as like I said previously, a larger increase in the player base should in general bring the progression of Ruthless to a more reasonable level if the population was higher. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll get to them. Thanks.